Thank you for joining us for our March Climate Cafe, Flipping Banks, Paths to Sustainable Finance. I'm Dana Freeling, the chair of Democrats Abroad Environment and Climate Crisis Council. I'm a Texas voter and I reside in Finland. We are now coming upon April, which is Earth Month, as we watch the progress towards our energy transition curtailed and our environmental and health protections sharply curbed as federal agencies are gutted and science funding stripped. We are all asking ourselves, how can we rise up for justice and democracy? For guidance and ideas, please visit Democrats Abroad website and take a look at the resistance roundtables. Angela's going to put a link in the chat for you. But these are some good ideas on who to contact, how to contact them, things you can do in your local communities. We need everybody on board for this fight. I think you all understand what's at stake. But taking individual action is ever important currently, as our federal power is so limited. Our special guest today, Larry Moffet, will share how we can exert personal power in shaping financial systems and its environmental accountability. In 2023, the world's 60 biggest banks provided $700 billion in lending and underwriting to the fossil fuel sector. And many have withdrawn now from the UN's Net Zero Banking Alliance. It's just mind-boggling. It's time for citizens to hold their banks accountable. So I'm just delighted to introduce Larry Moffet. He's an American living in Brussels. He is a longtime member of Democrats Abroad Belgium. And since 2018, he has been a climate activist member of the citizen movement called Rise for Climate Belgium. He's also joined me at the COP conferences for a couple of years, and I've enjoyed getting to know him there and the activism that he's been involved with. So Larry, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dana. Thank you for the kind introduction and for this opportunity to share with you this campaign that I've been working on. I will now share my screen and hopefully that's going to work. Great. Okay, so I want to thank also Dana for the title, which I think really captures it very well, Flipping Banks, Paths to Sustainable Finance. And I'd like to kick things off with a very short video by someone who is far more authoritative on climate than I am, and I think you will probably recognize him, but if not, I'll tell you who it is. And let's see if the video works and the sound. Now I have to go back. Yeah, here we are.
Begin taking on the greatest crisis humans have ever faced. Well, since that was signed, banks like Chase have dramatically increased their lending to the fossil fuel sector. A bank like Chase is a big player, not a small one. Look, they're a carbon giant. They're one of the brands around this planet that is directly responsible for the fact that the temperature is going up. And they need your participation in order to make the whole scheme work. So it's time for us to start figuring out how to break up with them. It's not that complicated. If you don't want to be participating in Chase's rampage across the earth, then you can get rid of your Chase credit card. You can close out your account at Chase Bank. There are banks and credit unions in this country that don't lend to the fossil fuel industry. All you're giving up when you give up your connection to a bank like Chase is your connection to the destruction of the earth. It's not only Chase Bank. If we had an announcement tomorrow from banks like Chase and Citi and Wells Fargo and Bank of America that they were no longer going to be lending hundreds of billions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry, well, The day after that happened, the value of those fossil fuel stocks would begin to plummet, and we would be in an entirely different world. No one wants to be invested in companies that the banks have declared are simply persona non grata. It will make it much harder for the fossil fuel industry to continue to operate with the business model that is breaking the planet.
So a very clear message from Bill McKibben, the founder of 350.org, and who has also launched another campaign called Third Act, which I will discuss later on. So the agenda for today, I'm just going to briefly tell you, explain who the three organizations are that are behind this campaign. I'll talk about the role of banks in financing unsustainability. I'll briefly focus on banks in Belgium, which is where I'm based. I'll talk about your and my bank account's carbon footprint, which is a lot bigger than many people realize. I'll mention a few other campaigns, including Third Act. I'll tell you about our plan of action, and then we'll hopefully have time for Q&A and discussion. So the title in French of our campaign is Changeons les banques, sinon changeons de banque, which translates not quite as well as let's change the banks or else change banks or switch banks. And it's a grassroots pressure campaign initiated by three organizations. So one of them is an NGO called Financité. It's a nonprofit which is dedicated to promoting and building fair and responsible finance. They have in Belgium 3,000 individual members and 90 organizational members. They have 30 chapters throughout French-speaking Belgium, so that would be the Walloon region and Brussels. And what they do is awareness raising. They publish studies, reports, magazine. They publish an annual ranking of banks along various social and environmental criteria. They do training and advocacy. And next, there is a citizen collective called Grands-Parents pour le Climat, Grandparents for Climate. So as the name suggests, these are grandparents who are, reasonably understandably concerned about the planet that they are going to be leaving to their grandchildren. And this is the local chapter of this organization in Uccle, which is the Brussels municipality where I live. And then Rise for Climate Belgium, which is the citizen movement that I'm a part of, which started back in 2018, as Dana mentioned, and which focuses mainly on European climate policy, since we are based here in Brussels, the capital of Europe, where the European institutions are located. Our objective is to mobilize citizens to have an impact on banks so that they will stop financing projects that are harmful to life on the planet. And primarily, we're talking about fossil fuel projects, and that they will, on the contrary, finance a just transition that is ecological, economic, and social. And how do we propose to do that? Through the following actions. We want to apply direct pressure on the banks themselves. We want to raise public awareness of the environmental and social impact of their money in the banks. And we want to encourage bank account holders to switch to more sustainable banks. Now we'll talk about the role of banks in financing unsustainability. And here I'm relying on an annual report called Banking on Climate Chaos. You have the URL there below the visual. And they do a really in-depth study of each bank to analyze and calculate how much each major bank is what funding it's providing to the fossil fuel industry. And so this is the main conclusion. So Dana mentioned that in 2023 or 2024, it was on the order of 700 billion. But in the past 8 years, so basically since the Paris Agreement, in total, it's been 7 trillion provided to the fossil fuel industry. This is the so-called dirty dozen. These are the 12 biggest banks that are providing the most fossil fuel, most financing to the fossil fuel industry. And at the top, we see, unfortunately, that it's mostly American banks, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, but there's also some Japanese banks, some British banks. No EU-based banks in the top 12, but they are certainly among the banks, as we will see later. Here's the full list of the 60 top banks. And so if you sort of look down on the left, you'll see the first EU bank is BNP Paribas, the French bank. A bit further down, then you have Deutsche Bank and 2 other French banks, Société Générale and Crédit Agricole, and then ING Group, which is a Dutch bank, and so on. Now, another problem, besides the fact that they are investing all this money into fossil fuel projects that are, destroying the climate, is what is known as stranded assets. So the problem here is that these banks are investing into these assets, so gas terminals, oil wells, oil and gas pipelines, etc. And under the impact of climate change, these assets will very likely become unprofitable at some point. They will lose value. They may have to be retired early because of climate impacts like fires or floods, due to regulations. If we ever come to a fossil fuel phase out, a compulsory one, or simply due to changes in consumption, so reduced demand for coal, oil, or gas. And the banks are really dangerously exposed to these assets. I don't have more recent data, but in 2019, 11 major European banks had a total of $530 billion in fossil fuel-related assets. And that represents, on average, 95% of their equity. And by equity, it's meant the capital that is sufficiently liquid that they can use to respond to any short-term losses that they might have. And also 15% of the financing that was issued by the banks in 2023 mature after 2030. And as we know, by 2030, the EU is supposed to reduce its emissions by 55%, and 4% will be maturing after 2050, which is when we're supposed to be climate neutral. So the problem is that these banks will be really at risk of bankruptcy, and that can have a real impact on the entire world economy, just as it did in 2008. And being so-called too big to fail, once again, those banks would have to be bailed out by taxpayers. Another issue is the lack of transparency and accountability. So those of you in the EU may have heard of the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD. So this is this European directive which requires large and medium-sized companies to identify, mitigate, and remedy potential adverse impacts on human rights or the environment in their business. And that is supposed to be phased in from 2027, but it exempts financial institutions from due diligence in what is known as their downstream chain of activities, meaning the clients that receive their services and products, such as loans and finance. Now, here again is the list of the top 30 banks that are investing the most in fossil fuel industry, and it includes 6 European banks. And I've put arrows next to the 2 banks that are the biggest retail banks in Belgium. So in Belgium, BNP Paribas has a subsidiary called BNP Paribas Fortis, and then ING is also very big in Belgium. So if I just focus very briefly on the banks in Belgium, Belgian account holders have a total of 300 billion euros sitting in savings accounts, earning very little interest, but being used by these banks to invest in fossil fuels. So we see that just in 2023, BNP Paribas invested 12 billion euros, Deutsche Bank 13 billion, ING 12.5, and Santander, the Spanish bank, which has a small retail operation in Belgium, a whopping 14.5 billion. Now, what Fairfin does, what Financité does together with its Flemish counterpart, Fairfin, is that every year they do this, what they call it the bank scan. So they look at here it's 9 biggest banks, retail banks, and they rank them according to different criteria, such as climate change, but also nature, whether or not they invest in weapons in the military industry, their transparency, corruption, whether they give huge bonuses to their top managers, human rights, workers' rights, etc. And so here we see the classification, the ranking on climate change. And at the very top, you see Triodos Bank, which some of you may know because they operate in different countries, and also a small Belgian bank called the VDK. And further down, you see Belfius. Now, Belfius is 100% owned by the Belgian government. So it's really pretty disappointing and shameful that it ranks so low when the Belgian government is obviously, committed to fighting climate change and to meeting the targets, the 2030 targets and 2050 targets, that are imposed by the European climate law. Now, just again, focusing here on these Belgian banks, just to explain that the way the banks provide financing to the fossil fuel companies is in 3 ways: through loans, so that's the left column there. So we see BNP Paribas lending almost 5 billion. Underwriting bonds. So when the fossil fuel company issues bonds, then the bank will help them to sell those bonds. And then on the right column, those are shares. So the banks actually will invest and buy shares in these fossil fuel companies. And then the chart on the right shows you where BNP Paribas has invested in companies like Saudi Aramco, Total Energy, British Petroleum, ExxonMobil, etc. So now let's look at your and my bank account's carbon footprint. And here I'm relying on a study that was done by Oxfam France in 2020. So the question is, how much CO2 equivalent would 10,000 euros in your bank account represent? And so the way this is calculated is on an annual basis, reflecting the emissions that would be generated by the 10,000 euros over a period of 1 year. So on the Oxfam France website, there was this simulator where you could enter the amount of money that you have in the bank. You could choose among these French banks, and then it will tell you exactly how many tons of CO2 your bank your money is causing. So here, as an example, I chose BNP Paribas. It's the green logo, the second one from the left. I chose the amount of 10,000 euros, and you can see that would be the equivalent of 6 tons of CO2 per year, which is equivalent to 600 meals with beef, or driving 27,000 kilometers in gas-powered car. So, probably much, much more impact than many people realize. And so the important conclusion here is that our money is our number one source of CO2 emissions. So in the case of these French banks, Oxfam concluded that for per million euros, the average intensity would be 439 tons of CO2. And if we consider that the French have on average 25,000 euros in their bank accounts, then the French people pollute more through their money than through their own consumption, whether it's food or transport or heating, etc. So I'm not going to read through all this, but it's just to say that the methodology that they used was developed by a think tank called Carbon 4 Finance. Very, very rigorous analytical methodology. So it was done very, very rigorously. Now, here's an interesting point. How many people are really aware of the impact that their money has in the bank? And this was a survey that was done in 2022 in Luxembourg out of a sample of 1,000 people. And the question was, to what extent do you realize that financial investments have an impact, either positive or negative, on the following areas? So you can see that fewer than half of the people that were surveyed understand that financial investments have an impact on the environment and on climate. So clearly, there is a lot of work that needs to be done on public awareness raising about this problem, this issue. So we are not the only ones doing this. There are plenty of other campaigns going on. Some started already years ago. Some are ongoing now, and I'll just focus on a couple, which I think are of particular interest to us as Americans. One is what I mentioned before, Third Act, Bill McKibben's campaign called Banking on Our Future. And so there, the conclusion is that if you have $62,500 in the banking system, your money produces more carbon than the average American does in 6 months. So that's more than the average French person, but we know that Americans have a much bigger carbon footprint than the French do, especially since the French do rely a lot on nuclear power for their electricity. So what Third Act does is that it encourages people, and specifically they're targeting senior citizens. So the baby boomers, because they tend to have the most money, the most wealth sitting in bank accounts. And so they encourage people to write letters to their banks. They have a specific campaign now targeting Costco, because Costco has a sort of like a branded credit card with Citibank, and so they're telling Costco to stop that relationship with Citibank. They have this really nice infographic, which I won't go into the detail of it, but I'm happy to share the PowerPoint, and you can also find this on their website, explaining how your money is contributing to the climate crisis. And then another campaign called Bank for Good, which is interesting because it is active both in the US and in Europe. So on their website, which for some reason the US website is offline. I don't know if they've been shut down by Doge or what, but I hope it'll come back on. But anyway, there is a search function where you can look for a good bank or a sustainable bank in your state, and you can choose what features you want your account to have. And then they explain exactly what criteria they used to make that selection. And in the EU, they have the same thing, and they have just recently launched campaigns in 3 countries, Germany, France, and Spain. So here I'm just showing the German website, and it has the same type of search function. So you can choose any one of the 27 EU member states, and then Okay, I just chose Germany, and it gives me these 6 banks. You see Triodos is one of the 6, and the others are more specifically German banks. And I think some of them are just strictly online banks, but they all meet the Bank for Good criteria. Now, our plan of action, our campaign here in Belgium, so there are sort of 3 axes that we're focusing on. The first one is raising public awareness. So we plan to organize in October a conference on sustainable finance with an expert in this field, which will be at a Brussels business school for the school alumni. We will do a survey to understand what either motivates or might hold people back from switching banks. And this is important because there is typically a certain inertia where people, even if they might be able to get a better interest rate or a better deal at another bank, they're just reluctant to do so, through procrastination, or they don't want to deal with the paperwork, or they just, like to they've been with the same bank for so long that they don't want to switch. So it's really important for us to understand what might be holding people back so that we can really target our messaging. And then we will participate in a festival here in Brussels in mid-April, which is a festival on sustainable solutions. And so that will be our sort of official launch. We want to mobilize citizens. We will organize a series of workshops on sustainable finance. We'll be doing webinars like this one. We want to raise the awareness of nonprofits and NGOs because, of course, they all have bank accounts to receive donations or to pay their bills. And so, of course, we think it's really important that they set the right example and that their bank accounts will be in sustainable banks. And the same for local authorities. We're going to go to them, and they have bank accounts for people to pay their taxes or their parking fines, or for the banks for the local councils to pay their bills. And so we want to make sure that they are consistent with their climate commitments by having their accounts in sustainable banks. And then we're really going to focus on the bank reputation. We're going to, just as Third Act does, we're going to encourage people to write letters to their banks, either to inform them, I'm closing my account with you, or if they are not willing to close their accounts, at least to write to them and say, look, I'm a longstanding client, customer of your bank, and I really want you to stop investing and funding fossil fuels. We're going to challenge Belfius, this Belgian public bank, about its actions. And we are going to protest outside bank headquarters or bank agency, bank branches. We will hand out flyers, and we might do something like this, which was a couple of years ago in front of the main office of BNP Paribas. They were holding up this sign which shows that the major Belgian banks had provided 11 billion euros to British Petroleum, Total Energy, Shell, ExxonMobil, etc. So that's it from me. If you want to stay in touch, this is the email of my organization, Rise for Climate Belgium, and that's also the email of Anne Berger, who works for Financité and is the sort of coordinator of our campaign. And now I open it up for Q&A, discussion, whatever you would like to share.
Thank you so much, Larry. That was shocking, stunning, so interesting. I learned an awful lot. I certainly have a lot of questions, and I'm sure our audience does as well. And the true DA tradition, if you'd like to ask a question, please type into the chat, star, hand up. Maybe I will just, I have so many questions, but I will just start off by saying I work for an NGO which operates in sub-Saharan Africa, and we just submitted yesterday an application for funding from City Foundation, Citibank, and I saw that was second. There are things I don't understand. I'm going to let other people now start asking their questions, and we will get to mine. I think Naomi was quickest. She has 3 stars and a hand up. So Naomi, take it away.
Hi, Dana. Thanks very much for the presentation. So I've kind of been involved with this for a long time, initially in the States and pushing back against banks like Citibank, and here in Switzerland with UBS, you know, the well-known violators. And I get a lot of information from BankTrack in terms of banks and insurance providers. They're an extremely critical part of this game because you cannot do fossil development, any of these projects, without being insured. And so the goal there is to stop these insurance companies from insuring these projects. But one of the things that we see much more success with, rather than individual account holders or the large investors like pension funds. And if you can get a major pension fund to pull their money from banks or, from investment, then this is millions of dollars or euros. So that's just my 2 cents worth. Sorry.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, Naomi. You're absolutely right about the insurance industry. And in fact, recently here in Brussels, there was an action by Extinction Rebellion in front of Marsh, which is a big insurance company, which may or may not insure the East African crude oil pipeline, which is just a absolutely horrible project to build a pipeline from Uganda to a port in Tanzania. And also pension funds, absolutely. Our campaign, we're really starting, we're trying to really focus only on savings accounts and checking accounts. And we'll see where that takes us, but we certainly could then consider targeting the pension funds and others. Absolutely, yeah.
But also don't leave out insurance companies.
Right.
Because whatever the banks want to do, these projects cannot go forward without being insured. And if we can stop any of the insurance providers, the big boys. So here we target Zurich and some of the other big providers. So that's an important goal to include as you roll along.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Naomi.
Anders, I see you have your hand up.
Sure. Well, thank you for the presentation and thank you for your work. And I definitely also learned a lot. I think I might want to disclose that more than 20 years ago, I did work for Deutsche Bank, but it's not in anything related to what we're talking about, basically. But the thing that I wanted to share was actually somewhat similar to Naomi, but maybe from a different angle, which is that in my job, I am working in a research role, writing policy papers and then interacting with policymakers and energy companies, euphemistically, I'll call energy companies that attend meetings to discuss policy. And I make the case that if we don't have people like me, climate researchers, climate policy workers in meetings like that, then those voices are not heard in those discussions, because when the politicians or banks would like to hear from climate activists, they know who to call, but when they want to talk about energy policy, they don't talk to climate activists. And going on what Naomi was saying, when you talk about divestment with pension funds, state funds, and things like that, I think a lot of times the reaction is, aside from any fiduciary duty towards diversification, we feel that supposedly we can influence companies better by retaining shares or by continuing to do business with them and pushing them in a low carbon direction or in an ESG direction instead of letting them go off on their own. So with the whole environment now of green hushing, instead of greenwashing, and banks pulling out of the Net Zero Alliance and scrubbing out references to sustainability or ESG off their web pages, I wanted to just share that in the meetings that I go to, a lot of times I've noticed smirks around the room from people when climate and net zero are raised, whereas I didn't see that a few months ago. And I guess I'm worried that maybe the momentum around civic society, civil society, having influence in this discussion is stalling out in the political environment, and that without the policymakers really behind this and in the discussion forcing it in the right direction, this is going to kind of become more marginalized. So I guess my question is, what's your view on what the banks are saying? Are they sticking with and just hushing a little bit, or are they smirking about their climate commitments now, in your view?
Well, yeah, thank you, Anders. I think, as far as I can see, there's a big difference between the European banks and the US banks. It's mainly the US banks that have withdrawn from the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Actually, BNP Paribas recently made an announcement that seemed to be fairly positive. We'll have to dig into it to see if it's greenwashing or not. But if you go to their websites, ING and others, they still claim to want to meet their ESG targets and goals, and they have their plans and everything. So I don't know if at some point, if they have a lot of exposure in the US, then maybe they will feel pressure to at least maybe on the US websites to remove any such references to DEI and ESG, etc. Yeah, and my movement, Rise for Climate, we are very much involved in street action, but we also then try to follow up by meeting with decision makers, whether it's members of the European Parliament or European Commission officials or members of the cabinet of the President of the European Council. But one thing we realize is that we're really struggling to get people to come out and protest at our rallies and our marches. Back in 2019, we were getting thousands of people, and now if we get maybe 100 people. So that's why I believe we have to step out of our bubble and reach beyond the usual activists who come to our events on a regular basis. And also, I think that this campaign of switching banks, it's fairly easy to do. It's not so easy for someone to sell their thermal engine vehicle and buy an electric car, or to replace their gas boiler with a heat pump, or to stop flying to go on holiday. But just filling out a form to switch banks, that's not that difficult, and it has a big impact as we've seen potentially. And I just hope that if we get enough people to do this, it's not really going
And
to
to
have
publicly proclaim why,
sorry.
to publicly proclaim why, to share why,
For us to
switching banks.
absolutely, yeah. But what I wanted to say is that it's not going to affect their bottom line probably that much. I mean, they have, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of retail customers, and if a couple of thousand close down their accounts, but it's their reputation, it's their image. They advertise, and they make all kinds of claims, and they have nice slogans. So I'm just hoping that we can have, that this sort of grassroots bottom up campaign can have an impact, while at the same time, clearly there are NGOs like Reclaim Finance and others who work more at the policy level.
I'm with Anders that I'm deeply concerned that climate and environment has sunk to the bottom of people's priorities. If you look at 4 or 5 years ago, that we're in the midst of such a dire crisis in terms of our security, our safety, our democracy on so many levels that and progressive policies have been blamed, unfortunately, for our loss in the US. It is very concerning. I went on this site and I tried to identify a bank in Finland to see where mine stood, and it says we can't find anything there. And you showed the biggest offenders in terms of banking, but do you have a chart, or can you share with us who are the banks that have demonstrated the most leadership in green banking?
Well, I've really been focused only on Belgium. If I see Liz asking for American banks, and I would have referred her to Bank for Good, but I don't know why their website is offline. But I think Third Act, I think they also have a list of banks. And I think Naomi, you mentioned
BankTrack is
BankTrack, yes,
in this area.
yeah.
But the good and the bad. And it's not EU driven. Whereas some of these sites are only EU, this is broad spectrum. Whoever is doing what, whoever is committed to their net zero, who is violating it, who is this, who is that, including insurance companies. BankTrack is great.
Yeah. The one thing I noticed on BankTrack is that when you look up a bank, like for instance, there's one of the major banks in Belgium is KBC. And so I wanted to see if KBC was in their ranking, and they do have KBC, and it mentions some investments that they made. But then when you drill down, you can see that it was actually some years ago. And since then, KBC has committed to no longer invest in fossil fuels. So I think it's important to check to see what the current policy of the bank is, because they may have, sort of made amends and corrected their past errors and
Anders has shared an interesting comment in the chat, and a link. Perhaps you'd like to extrapolate a little bit on your comment. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, I'm also very curious about the questions that have just been raised, and I was actually searching for maybe if I could find some answer. But this article came up, and it did occur to me also during your presentation that, banks invest where they perceive they can make a profit. And obviously part of that is their perception of risk. And unfortunately, we all know that the risk is largely a matter of policy decisions that are taken at the national or international or local levels. And it's also a function of the bank's own strategies, like where they trying to invest in the future for the best profits. And so this idea that I had while you were talking was, who are the ones that we could reward because they are really helping fund the energy transition. And this is an interesting ratio that I found because, of course, that gets at not the absolute amount, which your graph discussed, or the percentage, which your graph implied but didn't call out, but rather the ratio between, let's say, good and bad, per se. And of course, many of these banks, they will argue, and when I lived in China, this would be the classic argument from banks that I talk to there. The banks will argue that when they fund a fossil fuel investment, that is always the most advanced technology, the most high efficiency, the least emissions fossil fuel investment that you could make. And it's inherently, of course, replacing some vastly more polluting asset. And so, don't look at us, right? I'm not buying into that at all. But I would say that probably the idea of looking at, okay, are we really pushing them in the right direction instead of just, blocking, might be an interesting approach. Not criticizing your approach, but I'm just saying it could be an interesting way to look at things.
Yes, and that's certainly true. I mean, if you really want it to be absolutely, accurate, you probably would have to look at the specific projects that the bank is investing in. Is it true that it is replacing, is it allowing to shut down a coal-fired power plant with one that is brand new, that is gas-fired, but is only like for peak use and has, is capturing some of the CO2 or whatever. But of course, yeah, that's really difficult to do. I don't think even, banking on climate chaos, I don't think that they drill down to that level. And then, of course, we really want banks to invest in renewables, but the problem is that it's great that they're doing that, but if they still are continuing to invest in fossil fuels, then they're just adding the renewables on top of the fossil fuels. And I've been part of, or Rise for Climate has been supporting another campaign, which is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is trying to get countries and cities and regions to endorse this treaty, which would really be a commitment to phase out fossil fuel altogether.
Mary Ann has asked a question in the chat.
Okay.
One of your slides mentioned the mainstream banking system. You've explained what that means in terms of large-scale investors like pension funds and insurance companies, but I wonder how small institutions, namely American credit unions, are complicit in the mainstream banking system or somehow exist outside of it.
Well, so small banks and credit unions, they just don't have the money needed to provide financing to, Shell or ExxonMobil. I mean, those fossil fuel companies, they need billions. So even if they wanted to, they just wouldn't be able to do it. They might still be on a smaller scale. They might be making some investments that are not good for the environment, maybe just locally, like in some industrial plant that is releasing toxic chemicals or something. So I think then you would just have to look at what commitments that small institution or credit union has made. And that's why the slide I showed from Bank for Good, it showed what the criteria were. And so I think it includes a number of credit unions that have made pledges and made commitments. So
I think Angela's had her hand up for some time. Angela.
Well, I just actually had the exact same question as Mary Ann, because I realized when you were doing your presentation that all my banking in the United States and in Germany is at credit unions. It's not at the big banks. So
That's
Very
in
interesting.
Germany, that's Sparkasse. Is that what they are?
there is a Sparkasse, but I bank at Volksbank.
I see.
So yeah.
Naomi, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Dana. So, it's more of a comment. So number one, we all forget that the power is in the purse and money is the driver. Money is God wherever you go in the Western world. And so we have to be smarter about how we use our money and the message the money sends. Another approach to this might not be from the bank side of things, but there's all these organizations that are fighting different oil development projects. And so we know or uranium mining or these other things. So one can really track this from the project side. And what's more important than the conversion of a factory or an energy installation from coal to gas is the actual development, because where this extraction is taking place, you have huge environmental destruction on many levels. And so when you hear about these projects, you can track through who the developer is, what their funding source is, and target the funding source through all kinds of mechanisms, Facebook, social media. There's many different ways to make a statement personally and expose the entity for what they are doing. So that's just another thought.
Or yeah, I think you had to step away from the computer earlier. What I mentioned was that there is this project by Total Energy to build a pipeline in East Africa between Uganda and Tanzania. It's 1,400 kilometers, a heated pipeline. And so there's been a huge campaign in France and in Belgium against this project. And what they've been doing is targeting the banks that might be tempted to provide the funding, but also the insurance companies that would insure it. So that's one really important campaign that's
Very
ongoing.
important indeed. Maya has her hand up. We'd love to hear from you, Maya.
Hi. Yes, sorry, I actually ended up having to join late because I was in another meeting, in a work meeting, so I missed your presentation. I hope that there's going to be a recording, or I don't know if there's
There will
slides.
be a recording, and I think we'll try to make the slide deck available on the event page.
That would be amazing. I'm interested. You're saying that at the grassroots level, you're saying that you're having trouble getting people coming out for your protest demonstrations. I mean, I work for a small local environmental charity here in Oxford, and the network of environmental groups is so massive. It's really alive and well in terms of what people on the ground are trying to do and really pushing forward. And it's this discrepancy between how much pressure you can put on governments and corporations and banks and agribusiness to what everyday, what people can do at the grassroots level to build that momentum. I would love to have some information about banking options. I did try and go to your website. I wasn't able to get through. Is that Rise for Climate Belgium. I couldn't really seem to get through to that, but if there's
No,
any
no. Well,
information-
unfortunately, we're having trouble with our website, just like Bank for Good is having problems
Oh,
with their website.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
No, but and in fact, our campaign, we haven't actually launched it yet. We're still
Okay.
preparing it, so you would not see anything on our website anyway.
Okay, okay. Well, if anything, if there's anything that I could take away from this, or I'll follow up with Dana and Angela about links in the slide decks, but I really think it's of massive importance, you know, that it's the kind of thing that people can do, and it is the power of the purse. People, you know, if there's a big movement for people switching away and moving accounts, it will be noticed, especially if they say why they're moving, you know, why they're going, you know, that can really, you know, it can really have a big difference. I mean, I'm not that I need to tell you, but I'm just saying, you know, I see so much action going on at the local, really grassroots level. It's hard to see that you can't, that there wouldn't be something coordinated, some kind of momentum that could be really effective.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not just, you know, a few people leaving. It's not really going to hurt the bank, but if you can somehow make that declaration public and somehow get this into the press, into social media and the press, I think it destroys a reputation. It forces, it can force people to try to make change.
Yeah. And at least it highlights a conversation so that people start thinking about it and being more kind of mindful about the choices that they make.
And I must say, British banks are among the top providing finance to the fossil fuel industry. I just checked our list, and Barclays is number 6, and HSBC is number 12. So,
oh no, gosh. Okay. Okay, well, so lots of work to be done. Yeah, so I'll follow up with that. Lots of work to be done with that. But thank you.
Yeah, it was really just shocking, and it was a shocking presentation. I'm sad that I have been so ignorant about much of this, and I consider myself pretty well versed in the climate sector. But one thing I have a question. There's the investment that the banks make in terms of fossil fuel expenditure, but there's what else is calculated into the carbon footprint of a bank? That wasn't so clear to me from your presentation.
so I think they're really looking only at the money that is being invested. They're not looking at the carbon footprint of the bank branches, you know, the heating and air conditioning, or the travel by the bankers and all that.
Or the investment funds. I know that here in Finland, I belong to a Nordic bank, used to be Finnish, now I think it's owned in Sweden. And I have put my money, it gave us a choice when we made an investment. Do you want very green only to be invested in very green enterprises, or do you want it moderate, or do you not care? And one will generally yield a higher percentage than the other. And they pride themselves, this bank I know, like everything in Finland, prides itself on being pretty sustainable and green. But that's just, that's just, you know, perhaps what they're telling us, or it's what they're allowing us to invest in. What does that mean about what the bank is investing in?
Well, the bad news, at least in Belgium, and Financité, this Belgian NGO, they track investments. They track all the mutual funds that the banks are encouraging their customers to invest in. And I think that I don't have the exact, because I took the slides out of the deck because I didn't want to cover too many different topics. Here I really only focused on savings accounts, but out of something like 400 funds that were claimed to be sustainable, they uncovered, or they analyzed only some 30 or so were really green and sustainable. So unfortunately, at least in Belgium, there seems to be a lot of greenwashing in terms of when a fund can actually call itself green. And in Belgium, there are different categories. I think one is Article 9. Those are the funds that are supposed to be the most sustainable, that meet the strictest criteria. And then Article 8 are the ones that are not quite as strict. So Article 8, you can pretty much forget about those. And then even among the Article 9, not all of them were fully sustainable. So you really have to sort of dig in and look behind look at the fine print to see what those funds are investing in.
And there has been pressure in the last 5 years for banks to at least pretend to be sustainable. But I think that pressure, gloves are off, the pressure's off, nobody cares anymore. It's not even green hushing anymore. I really like that term. I had not heard that. Difficult time. Maya, we were also discussing the fact that with so many crises unfolding at once, with the zone being flooded, so to speak, and money going to arming the European Union, and that emphasis has really shifted away from climate and environment, which is a big concern.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think that's one of the areas where every day, community action groups and things like that can make a difference, because that's where local people organizing together can help sustain some kind of pressure, even if it seems like it's not touching major corporations and things like that. Like I was just in a meeting last night. We're trying to install a community heat pump in a local area here. So things are actually happening and people are doing work. But yeah, it might be not so obvious at the kind of big corporate governmental level, unfortunately, in terms of meeting those targets and stuff like that. So yeah. But I mean,
great that you're doing the work from the ground up.
thank you.
Really,
But
thank you. And you're doing it. You're also in Oxford, where Anders is.
Yes,
I
yes,
heard.
I am. Hi, Anders. I know him. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that, across the spectrum politically, this is a moment where it's movements of people that will be making the difference. Um, you know, Someone, I went to an event on Women's Day, Angela Davis, she said, if you look at all the movements, if you think of the civil rights movements and women's suffrage and any liberation movements, any of those things, that they're done by people. They're not done by a president who just kind of comes in and by a stroke of a pen says this or that. It's movements of people. So that's what gives me hope in this moment when I see people acting together. So yeah.
Well, I really hope that there will be, just like there was in 2018 and 2019 with Fridays for Future and all of the climate marches in the US, in North America, in Europe, around the world. I hope that there will be a similar uprising with sort of public outrage at what's going on.
Yeah, and school strikes, climate strikes. I mean, my oldest son went to those, and it was kind of like having to email the school and say, I'm allowing my son to take the day off today because this is what he's doing. It's like, but still, you can keep pushing forward that way.
And not to mention the 7 trillion a year in subsidies from governments to the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah.
This was something, a lot of it was from the top down. The Biden administration achieved extraordinary, success in the legislation that they passed. And I'm really grateful. He really is our climate president. But the one thing that he failed to do was to eliminate the fossil fuel subsidies. And a lot of money has been doled out from the Inflation Reduction Act, but so little has actually been accomplished from the infrastructure. They haven't built the charging ports, which they promised to build. They had 3 years to do it, to help with the transition to electric vehicles. So many things that they had, the legislation was passed, the money was there, and we just seem to have so much difficulty in building the things that we promised to build, that the people would feel and see. Our president has done this for us. The broadband.
But Dana, if you think of where IRA money mostly went, it went to red states.
Well, that's the IRA. I was actually partly talking about the bipartisan infrastructure bill,
no,
but
but
the
I'm
factories, the
saying-
renewable energy factories, those are being built in red states.
Right, but if you think of where the money went in general, and look at how
Yeah.
people voted. So, and under Biden, you had more oil development than any prior
I
administration.
know. I
So,
know.
come
I
on.
know.
We have not divorced ourselves from these
know.
criminals. And I'm going to call them that because that's what they are.
I know. It's all heartbreaking. And I want to give credit, though, Naomi, where credit is due. He understood, he moved the needle. The administration did a lot, but not everything that was, critical things that were required, and weren't able to build a lot that was, the money was allotted for, the legislation was passed, which would have made a difference across the country. But
I don't know if Angela still has her hand up.
I do.
oh, Angela, you have your hand up. I want to hear from you. I'm so sorry.
Well, I was just thinking that switching to other banks or switching to savings banks might be a good climate action for Earth Month to encourage people to do it. Maybe we could get some other orgs to try to do it. I mean, it's one of the things that they're planning to do, or that they've talked about, is getting rid of the FDIC. And once they do that, when they crash the economy, then your funds will no longer be insured. And there's different rules that apply to savings banks as opposed to, regular these big banks. So there's a lot of incentive to move your money to places that respect our planet. So maybe we could talk to some other orgs and see what we can do. I mean, even if we could only move, a few thousand people, once the train starts, it might keep going. Really. I think that if you're, I used to work in the banking industry, and it sucks. This is one reason why I don't have a bank account at anything but a credit union. They are not good. They're not good at all. They waste a lot of money on their luxuries and their bonuses. And the bank I used to work for, actually, I think it got bought by Wells Fargo a while ago, but it got bought after I stopped working there. And we had our own airline. So you could, depending on your rank, you had to have a certain rank before you could get on the private jets. But I mean, I could get on. So it's not, they're not good. We need something,
Wow.
yeah, to motivate people to move away from these institutes because one, crazy Trump and crazy Musk want to get rid of the FDIC, and also they're not helping our environment. So maybe we should come up with some kind of an action.
Despite Musk having electric cars, Tesla is like, it's just so ironic that he's like, oh, electric cars, but I'm in bed with fossil fuel industry now
Thank you,
because, anyway.
But they were never technologically acceptable, Tesla. And Nicholas Tesla must be rolling in his grave that his name has been so abused by this. I will call him what he is. He's a Nazi.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so this
Nail on the head.
you are seeing a rebellion. You're seeing it when these MAGA GOP people come back to their constituents at their town halls. People are screaming at them and yelling at them. You are a fire is slowly, right now it's only smoldering, but we need to fan those flames.
Yeah. We need to take their money away from them. That's the
Yes.
only thing that's really going to get through to people is that if they look at what's
Right.
happening with Tesla, and I don't know if anybody's seen that pathetic interview that Musk did, where he's like, I've done nothing. I've only been a productive person in our society, and I don't know why people don't like Tesla. And, and I'm just like, you should be lucky that that the government is heavily subsidizing you, because if you were any normal company, you'd be closed by now if you'd killed as many people with your cars as
Right.
Tesla has.
Including all the bloody things that blew up in the
Yeah, the SpaceX.
stratosphere.
Yeah.
And add now he's manipulating the closing of other things so that money comes to him.
It's
I
just-
mean, this
Yeah.
is, yes, it is one giant piece of evil.
Yes, it's
That-
bad.
Yes, that
And we have to do something. We have to do something that will hurt them. The other thing that I've been thinking about, and I don't know, this might take a little planning, but we need a day where people stay off of social media. We just pull the plug and do something else. I don't know.
And
I
feel
know
more
that's hard.
relaxed.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure you would. But I just think it's that we have to do things that will hurt them and not, I mean, I understand. I mean, protesting in person, that is good. But when people are protesting, they're streaming it on, Facebook and Instagram and all sorts of YouTube and wherever else. But we just need to show these people, we're not your bitches. We don't have to use your products. We don't have to use your banking. We don't have to do anything. And ironically, since we had that the day of not shopping, and I think there was an Amazon one, but since that day, I haven't been shopping that much.
Yeah, me
Period.
too.
Well,
Yeah.
I remember, this goes way back, Cesar Chavez and the Great Boycott.
Mm.
And the success of this boycott was extraordinary. There were protests and signs in front of every bloody supermarket. And grapes
What
don't
year
have,
was that, Naomi?
oh my God, this was, I think, back in the 60s. I
Wow.
can't remember. But grapes don't have a long shelf life. And this was a marked success because such poisons were being used, and the people that did this work in the fields were dying. And this was not okay. So I think we have to be clever about, look how many farmers voted for the felon. But now they're being slapped in the face.
Yeah, but I don't know that that will necessarily change their mind. I I saw something that was somewhat disturbing, but I mean, par for the course. It was a focus group that was done recently, and it was like all these people that voted for Trump, and they didn't like what he was doing. But when they were asked, would they have voted differently? Only one person out of like 12, 13 people said that they would have voted differently. And one of the things that they voted for, a lot of them said that he said he would make things cost less. And I feel like people in America are super ignorant. I
Yes,
don't know any other way to put that.
correct.
And but it's not even just ignorance, it's like they're stubborn ignorant. Like a liar tells you, I'm going to make prices lower, and then you vote for him because the other person isn't saying that. But the other person isn't saying it because it's not true. Like it's like a circle of just nonsense. Like the liar says something and then it doesn't happen. And then you're like, what? And then you're back to the liar, like, hey, liar,
Right.
um,
But Angela, what did all these people miss in version 1?
oh
I
no.
mean, what didn't you get about the tax break he gave that drove up the debt extraordinarily? What connective tissue hasn't grown this is what I don't understand. Where is the messaging at the grassroots level that really connects people? It reminds me of kids not knowing where milk comes from. They think it comes from a carton in the supermarket instead of from a cow. So where is this connective tissue between this is what you're experiencing and this is who did it to you?
Yeah, well,
but
then we have to take responsibility as a party, and
Agreed.
we had a star-studded campaign. We had so many people on the ground. But we failed.
Uh-huh. But Dana, it's been a long time since it's been a top-down focus. And you don't build a political party
That's
from the
right.
top
We
down.
failed,
You build it
Naomi.
from
We
the
failed.
bottom up. It is all about the grassroots, the
That's right. We
local
failed.
political situation that builds local, state, federal.
You are right.
yeah, but I'm just gonna I agree with you, but there was other things happening in this election. It wasn't just that the people that we didn't go top down or bottom up or whatever, because there were people doing that. It was really, in my mind, like a lot of weird circumstances, a lot of weird things happen because literally, and I think a lot of people lied also about what was important to them. I mean, like right now, everybody was like about these stupid eggs, and I wish people would stop bringing them up because that was just a fake. That was something that people were making up because I don't think the eggs were that expensive before Trump got elected. Now, my husband told me that he read something about that eggs are the biggest. There's more eggs being busted at the border than fentanyl. People are
They
trying
contacted the government of Finland to ask if we would sell them eggs.
Yeah,
And
but people
England
are,
said, sorry, we don't think it would make enough of a difference for you.
yeah, but people are smuggling them over the border now to try to get eggs. And I'm just like, yeah, that wasn't what it's almost as if I understand that there's a lot of sexism, but there was really a lot of sexism in this race. It's
There
because
was,
there was a
and
lot.
racism.
Yeah, there was a lot.
There
And
were a lot of factors that played into it, but I still think we have to take a cold, hard look at who we are as a party, who we're alienating in our party, who we're listening to on the ground. I think it doesn't help to be defensive right now, even though we worked so hard. Everything I could have done, I did. And I know you feel the same way, Angela.
yes, but I don't think I'm defensive because I mean, I know what's wrong with our party. It's all these rich donors. And it's also
Thank Bill Clinton for that.
and it's
focus.
also the bill, these people that are coming up, in the beginning, Kamala and Tim Walz were talking about how these people were just weird. And you notice that they stopped that at a certain point because I think that they didn't want to use that, but that was
That
working.
worked.
That
Right.
was working, and then they stopped because some person who's getting a consulting fee said no, switch to something else.
Well,
You know?
look at the flip-flop on fracking. Because Kamala didn't want to lose Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, I know.
But there's a disconnect from how Pennsylvanians feel
Mhm.
about fracking,
Yeah.
that they can light the water that comes out of their faucet.
Yeah, what was that
And
movie?
so this is
The
completely
documentary about that?
missed messaging, refusing to meet with Palestinians, missed messaging. And I think she lost because a lot of people just didn't vote because they were turned off.
A lot of people didn't vote, and there were
Right.
reasons there. A
In
lot of
in
people didn't vote.
Right.
You
In
all,
addition,
I love this discussion.
but
This
we're
has been a
late.
fantastic presentation by Larry. I have learned so much. We have come to the bottom of the hour, so it's time to sign off. And looking forward to getting the slide deck from you.
I got it.
We will share the recording on YouTube and welcome you back in Earth Month. We're working on activities for April, and we'll certainly apprise you of them as they come to fruition.